Hello and welcome to FX Fix, where we take a look at good, bad and dated visual effects. With Season 3 of House of the Dragon, and the original Season 2 finale for that matter still months away, and new spin-off A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms to tide us over for now, I thought it was a good time to go back to Season 1, specifically Episode 7, Driftmark. After Laena Velaryon commits suicide by dragonfire rather than dying in childbirth, the Targaryens and Velaryons gather at House Velaryon's island Driftmark for her funeral, where the rift between the two branches of House Targaryen deepens as Prince Aemond claims Laena's dragon Vhagar as his own, but loses an eye in a fight with his cousins afterwards. It's a great episode, full of scope, violence, family drama, and a bit of raunch for good measure. Unfortunately, like Game of Thrones' climactic battle episode The Long Night, a good chunk of this episode is another Miguel Sapochnik masterclass in not being able to see a bloody thing. And unlike the other VFX mistakes in this season that were quietly fixed without fanfare, and as with The Long Night, HBO doubled down on this one, issuing this statement. Twice. And the thing is, they are right. This was a choice. Because these scenes weren't a series of grueling night shoots, they were filmed in broad daylight in April. And we know this because not only did photos of the location filming end up in various newspapers, but HBO themselves released this promo shot of Rhaenyra and Daemon on the beach, as well as another with a far less aggressive colour grade applied to it. After Laena's funeral, we gradually see the sunset and finally transition from dusk to night at about 18 minutes in. And until the action moves indoors after Aemond rides Vhagar for the first time at around 31 minutes, the colour grading is absolutely ridiculous. The Daemon and Rhaenyra scenes lose all nuance because you can't see Matt Smith or Emma Darcy's faces properly, and the dragon claiming scene is primarily a piece of visual storytelling, which only really works if you can actually see what's going on properly. We are going to fix this, but first I want to go over the basics of colour grading and day for night shooting. Day for night is when you have a scene set at night, but film it during the day and then edit the footage in post to make it look like it's set at night. This is usually done for budget and practical reasons, particularly in the case of the scenes featuring Leo Ashton as Aemond, since he was only 13 years old at the time and was limited in the number of hours he could film. The problem is that none of the standard tricks like keeping the sky out of shot, filming at sunset, or lowering the camera's colour temperature setting to have a blue tint were used here. As we established earlier, the beach scenes were shot in broad daylight during the spring, and when initially colour graded, looked like this. This tends to work poorly because the colours contrast far too much and colour grading can only go so far. This is why raw footage is always shot with a very muted colour palette called a log profile, to allow for more flexibility when editing. Or in the case of Wicked, just leaving it as it is. But if you look at these two official promo images, applying the same settings to them in DaVinci Resolve gives you two very different results. The second works far better because the source material is closer to the colour of what you are trying to achieve, while the first looks absolutely terrible and needs far more extreme editing, which makes it look even worse. And this is basically what happened with the episode as a whole. Footage shot in broad daylight had to be aggressively colour graded to simulate the scenes being set at night, resulting in a final product where you can barely see anything, which means fixing this will be quite a challenge. Fortunately, I'm an idiot and a glutton for punishment, so let's crack on! The first clip we're doing is Otto Hightower finding grandson Prince Aegon passed out drunk just as the sun sets. I think. It's a really weird grade, so it's kind of hard to work out what time this is supposed to take place. The first step is to try and restore the log profile to allow as much room for adjusting the colour as possible. So to do that, we take the raw footage into DaVinci Resolve and increase the various primary colour settings just a tiny bit while massively upping the colour temperature. What this basically does is lighten the image as much as possible while cancelling out the bluish tint and restoring some of the original colouring. Because this is a compressed file and we're making some pretty drastic changes, it does cause a lot of artefacting, which is pretty unpleasant to look at. So to solve that, we run the colour graded footage through Topaz Video AI, using the Proteus model to smooth out the blocky bits in the background here, while sharpening some of the details that were washed out by the original colour grade, like the engraving on Aegon's cup and the patterns on his tunic. After this, we take the AI processed footage back into DaVinci Resolve for the final grade. which we achieve by dropping the colour temperature to give the whole thing this slight blue tint, using the curve settings to pull down the amount of red in the image, and finally boosting the colours by 10% just to make it look a bit fuller. It's not perfect. There are places where things still look a bit washed out, like this section of wall, and in some cases the AI has over-sharpened a few things. But on the whole, I think it is a marked improvement. It's much easier on the eyes, a lot of the production design detail is restored, and you get a better sense of time passing than in the original.
Brother!
Get to bed.
Next up, Daemon and Rhaenyra on the beach, as uncle and niece discuss their respective marriages, and then hook up in the wreckage of a boat washed up on the shore, as I'm sure we all have at a funeral at some point in our lives. This presents a bigger challenge than the other two scenes when you consider the absolutely massive difference between the footage as it was originally shot and edited and how it was broadcast. So the secret here was to abandon any thoughts of making it look like the raw footage, because it's just not possible without making the thing look utterly hideous. So when increasing the primary colour settings to try and restore some light and colour, the key thing was to make the changes as small as possible. Unfortunately, this still introduced a ridiculous amount of artefacting, this time on the actors themselves, so it's over to Topaz Video AI again. The AI processing on this was definitely trickier than the other two scenes, and it took a lot of trial and error to find a workable solution, using the iris model with some very low settings. It's not a perfect solution, and there are some shots where you can still see the artefacting, but crucially it does preserve the details like Daemon's scarring and the pattern on Rhaenyra's dress while smoothing out the worst bits. After that, it's back into DaVinci Resolve for one final pass as we drop the colour temperature and increase the blue curve while dropping the yellow to darken the whole thing just a bit, while still keeping it light enough to follow the scene. This is probably my least favourite of the three shots for how it came out, but it has added back a lot of detail and nuance. Not just by making the actors' faces easier to see, particularly during the love scene where you're relying entirely on the visuals, but also by adding back these small details like the colour of Rhaenyra's rings and the scarring on Daemon's back. It has its problems, but when you consider that this is what the original looked like and that this is how it was shot, I don't think it's a bad job, all things considered.
You abandoned me.
I spared you. You were a child.
Yes. Yes, I was a child. And look at what my life became without you. Droll tragedy.
Go on, I wonder what you think of mine by comparison.
I know little of it.
And now finally, the most important scene in my eyes, Aemond claiming Vhagar. This sequence is almost entirely visual, and the centrepiece is this whacking great CGI dragon. So naturally, the show does everything it can to make the thing as hard to follow as possible. Right from the start, the opening shot shows the Velaryon castle in the background so that you can understand just how much time has passed and how far Aemond has travelled alone to find Vhagar. But all that detail is lost in the colour grading. So here's the fix. Because this footage has been pretty heavily altered, it means having to do the same in reverse. So first, we increase the primary colour settings across the board quite significantly to make the image as light as we can without introducing a lot of artefacting. Crucially, we're increasing the colour temperature and boosting the colours by 30% to try and restore as much light and colour information as possible, while upping the contrast just to pull it back a little bit. Then finally, we use the curve settings to lighten the whole thing a bit more, while also pulling down the red levels just to give it the absolute tiniest hint of blue. As with the other two scenes, making massive changes to an already compressed file does result in a few nasties in the background. So again, we run it through Topaz Video AI using the Proteus model to smooth out the artefacting while sharpening some of the details, particularly on Vhagar herself. And that's pretty much it. I did experiment with one last colour grade to add some blue to it, but I honestly prefer it without. It shows off Vhagar's colouring and the scenery a lot more, and it helps to give the impression that more time has passed. You see Rhaenyra waking up on the beach during this sequence, so I kind of like the idea that this is in the early hours of the morning, gradually heading towards dawn, so the sky is a bit lighter. And at the risk of blowing my own trumpet, this is honestly such a huge improvement over the original. There are a few shots where it's a bit dodgy, like the close-ups of Aemond and the final shot where Vhagar lands, because, as with the brick wall in the Aegon scenes, the regrading has completely wiped out the detailing on the castle. But not only is the visual storytelling a lot easier to follow, now that you can see details like the castle in the background in the opening shot, but there are also all these little nuances from the VFX artists that you can appreciate. Like these birds landing on top of Vhagar as she sleeps, the sand being disturbed as she breathes out, and her wings clipping the sand dunes as she takes off. It also just makes Vhagar much more visually impressive. With this new grade you can see the subsurface scattering on her wings, the red streaks on her scales, even her individual taste buds. There's a huge amount of excellent VFX work in this sequence that was drowned out by bad editing. So I'm really happy that I've been able to go some way to restoring it. This was never going to be perfect, largely because the broadcast version removed most of the raw colour information, so there wasn't a huge amount to work with. But on the whole, I think it's a significant improvement. There's not a lot to be said other than you can see things more clearly now and follow the story more easily. It goes some way to restoring a lot of the visual detail that had been removed, and, especially for the Vhagar scenes, makes the whole thing a lot more dynamic and exciting. What do you think? Is this an improvement over the original? Feel free to sound off in the comments below, check out the cut down version of this video available now, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.